I still remember the smell of burnt coffee in my mother's small kitchen, a scent that clung to every corner of the walls as if it were desperately holding on to the days gone by. That day I was 10 years old, curled up on a chair, my hands clutching a science book I pretended to read. From the living room came my mother's soft sobs, blending with my father's thunderous shouts. "Margaret, who do you think you are to question me?" Then the sound of something shattering, a glass or perhaps my mother's entire world breaking apart on the floor. I am David Carson, 35 years old, a software engineer living in Seattle, where the relentless rain seems to want to wash everything away but never touches the memories inside me. I have a nice apartment, a good job, and a life that outsiders would call fine. But fine doesn't mean peaceful. Every night as the city lights blur outside my window, I find myself 10 years old again, trembling in that kitchen, listening to my mother's sobs, powerless to do anything. My mother, Margaret, now in her 60s, still lives in the house in the Chicago suburbs where I grew up. She was once an elementary school teacher, beloved by the children for her gentle voice and stories about the sparrows in the garden. But behind that smile were scars that never healed. My father, James Carson, was a charismatic man who worked in real estate. He always wore crisp suits, his hair slicked back impeccably, and a smile that made people trust him easily. But I knew that behind that fake smile was nothing more than a cunning wolf. You might think I'm a terrible person for speaking about my father this way. But I believe you'd feel the same if you knew what he did to my mother. My father was the man my mother once loved passionately, but he was also the one who shattered her heart with affairs, arguments, and blows that still echo in my dreams. In rare moments when she opened up, my mother told me she believed he would change, that somewhere inside him there was still a trace of love for her. But I didn't see it. All I saw were the bruises on her arms, the times she bowed her head to hide her tears. Despite how much my father hurt her time and again, I still don't understand why she didn't leave him. Perhaps she still loved him. Or maybe she wasn't strong enough to cut the ties that bound her to him for so many years. I don't know. I don't have the answers. And to be honest, I haven't had the courage to ask her why she couldn't walk away from the cruel man I call my father. I grew up in a house where love and violence intertwined like a discordant song. There were days when my father came home with flowers and apologies, embracing my mother as if nothing had happened. But just a few nights later, I'd hear her screams, his growls, and the sound of things shattering. I remember the first time I dared to leave my room to protect her. I was 12, small and trembling, shouting, "Stop! You can't hit Mom!" My father looked at me, his eyes bloodshot, and pushed me to the floor. That push didn't just hurt me physically. It carved into me a sense of helplessness, the feeling that I'd never be strong enough to protect the person I loved. I left Chicago to attend college in Seattle and stayed to build my life here. I call my mother every week, listening to her talk about her garden, the sparrows, and trivial stories that mask her sadness. She rarely mentions my father, but when she does, I hear the conflict in her voice. Love, fear, and hope all tangled together. I want to scream to tell her to leave him, but every time I try, she just gives me a sad smile and says, "I'm fine, David, I don't want you to worry." It was a rainy day in Seattle, the kind of downpour that makes you want to curl up in a blanket and forget the world. I was sitting in my office, staring through the window at the misty buildings when my phone buzzed. It was my mother's number. I smiled, thinking she might be calling to tell me about a new flower in her garden. But her voice on the other end was trembling, as if she were trying to keep herself from breaking. "David," she whispered, "I don't want to bother you, but I don't know what to do anymore." I sat up straight, my heart pounding. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay?" She was silent for a moment, then soft sobs broke through. "It's your father. He's cheating again. With a young woman, a secretary at his company named Jessica. I saw the messages on his phone when he left it on the table. I only asked a few questions, but he flew into a rage. She paused, as if the words hurt as much as the memory. "He hit me again, David, right in the living room." I felt the blood in my veins boil as if the world around me was burning. I gripped the phone tightly, trying to keep my voice calm, though inside I wanted to scream. "Mom, are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm fine, son. I don't want you to worry. I don't know why I keep letting him do this to me." Her voice broke as if she were blaming herself. I took a deep breath, trying to stop the images from my childhood from flooding back. My mother curled up in the corner of the kitchen, my father standing there with cold eyes. "Mom, you're not bothering me. I'm flying to Chicago right now. Don't stay there alone with him, okay?" She agreed, her voice weak, but I knew she was still scared, still torn between her love for my father and the pain he caused. That's how my mother is, always trying to hold everything together even when it's already shattered. I booked a flight to Chicago that same night, the earliest one available. While packing my suitcase, I called Ethan, my best friend from college. We met in a computer science class during our freshman year, back when we both dreamed of changing the world through technology. But Ethan soon realized he loved debating and law more than coding, so he switched to studying law while I continued with software engineering. Despite our different paths, Ethan remains the only person I've ever told about the nights my father hit my mother, about the helpless 10-year-old boy inside me. "David, you okay?" Ethan asked when he heard my voice over the phone. "You sound stressed." I briefly told him about my mother's call, about my father's affair with the secretary, Jessica, and the bruise on my mother's arm. "My mom's still living with him, Ethan," I said, my voice bitter. "She knows how awful he is, but she won't leave. Today he hit her again." Ethan was quiet for a moment before responding. "Do you need me to help with anything? I can connect you with a lawyer in Chicago, or at least give you some advice on how to handle this." I shook my head, even though I knew he couldn't see me. "Thanks, Ethan. Right now I just need to get to my mom, but I might need you later." "Absolutely," Ethan said. "Call me anytime and I'll be there." The flight to Chicago took 4 hours, but to me it felt like a lifetime. I sat by the window watching the clouds drift by, letting memories pull me back to the past. I remembered a Thanksgiving night when I was 13. My father was drunk and my mother was trying to keep things cheerful by telling a funny story. But then my father cut her off, his voice sharp as a knife. "Margaret, can you shut up for once? No one cares about your stupid stories." My mother lowered her head and I saw her hands tremble as she held the serving dish. I wanted to stand up to scream in his face, but I just sat there, silent like a coward. When the plane landed, I took a taxi straight to the house in the Chicago suburbs where my parents still lived. The small house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees that blazed red every fall. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding, unsure if my father was home. When my mother opened the door, I barely recognized her. She was thinner than the last time I saw her, her hair grayer, and her eyes carried a deep sadness. "David," she said, hugging me, her voice choked with emotion. "You didn't have to come. I'm fine." I held her hands, feeling her frail fingers. "Mom, I'm here now. You don't have to go through this alone anymore." We sat in the living room, the soft yellow light illuminating old family photos on the wall. There was one of the three of us, taken when I was little, smiling brightly at a barbecue. Looking at it, I wondered how my mother could stay when every day with my father was another day of suffering. My mother told me more about what happened the day before. "I didn't mean to snoop through his phone," she said, her voice low. "But he left it on the table and I saw the messages from her, Jessica. I only asked a few questions, but he lost it. He said I had no right to interfere, that I was just a useless old woman." She paused, pointing to a faint bruise on her arm. "Then he hit me. I tried to run, but he was stronger." I felt the blood in my veins boil again. "Mom, why don't you leave?" I asked, though I knew the question might hurt her. "You don't have to live like this." My mother looked out the window where the faint moonlight illuminated the garden. "I don't know, David. Sometimes I think I still love him, or maybe I'm just afraid. afraid that if I leave, I'll lose everything we once had. She turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears. I know I'm wrong, but I'm not strong enough. I knelt before her, holding her hands. Mom, I'm your son. If you won't let me help you, then what am I living for? She smiled, a sad but loving smile. You're like me when I was young, David, always wanting to fix things even when they're already broken. That night, I lay on the sofa in the living room, listening to the rain tapping against the window. My father wasn't home. My mother said he often went out in the evenings, probably with Jessica. I couldn't sleep, not because of the hard sofa or the sound of the rain, but because the images kept flooding back. My mother crying, my father shouting, and the helpless 10-year-old boy inside me. I knew I couldn't let my mother live like this anymore. My father had hurt her for too long, and my mother, despite her love for him, couldn't keep enduring it. I picked up my phone and looked up the number of a private investigator Ethan had once mentioned, a man named Carl who specialized in investigating affairs and illegal behavior. I sent him a short text. I need someone followed. Can we meet as soon as possible? Carl replied immediately, arranging to meet me the next morning at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. I put the phone down and looked out the window. The rain was still falling, but inside me a fire was burning. This time I wouldn't let my father keep hurting my mother. This time I would help her get justice. The next morning I stopped by a coffee shop in downtown Chicago to meet with Carl. It was drizzling outside. Stepping into the cafe, the warm smell of freshly baked bread and the soft hum of jazz music filled the air, but none of it could ease the heaviness in my chest. My mind was consumed with thoughts of my mother. Her gaunt face, the bruise on her arm, and her trembling voice as she admitted she still loved my father, despite the pain he had caused her time and again. Carl, the private investigator Ethan had recommended, was already seated in a corner of the cafe, a cup of black coffee in front of him. He was in his 40s with salt and pepper hair, wearing a worn leather jacket, and his sharp eyes seemed to cut through everything. "David Carson?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I nodded and sat down across from him. "Thanks for meeting me so early." Carl took a sip of his coffee, studying me as if he could read my entire life story through my eyes. "Who do you want me to follow and why?" I briefly told him about my father, James Carson, about his affair with the young secretary named Jessica, about the times he hit my mother, and about how my mother stayed despite her suffering. I couldn't hide the anger in my voice, but Carl just nodded, jotting down a few notes in a small notebook. "I need specifics," he said. "Address, his schedule, anything you know about this woman." I gave Carl the details about my father's real estate company, where he worked, and a brief description of Jessica based on what my mother had told me. Young, blonde, a secretary. "I want proof," I said, my hands clenching under the table. "Proof of the affair, and if possible of what he's done to my mom. I want him to pay." Carl raised an eyebrow. "Pay how? Legally or some other way?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to rush over and punch my father in the face the way he'd done to my mother for years. But I shook my head. "Legally, I want to do this the right way. My mom deserves to be safe, and he needs to be held accountable." Carl nodded. "I'll start right away. I'll tail him, take photos, record anything if I get the chance. If he's up to anything shady, I'll find it. But you need to be prepared. These things are rarely simple." I knew he was right. My father wasn't someone who could be easily dealt with. He had money, connections, and always knew how to slip out of trouble. But this time, I wouldn't let him win. Back at my mother's house, I found her watering the plants in the garden, her thin sweater dotted with raindrops. She smiled when she saw me, but the smile couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. "Have you had breakfast yet?" she asked, as if everything were normal. I sat down on a wooden bench in the garden and pulled her to sit beside me. "Mom, we need to talk. About Dad." My mother stiffened, her grip tightening on the watering can. "David, I don't want to make a big deal out of this. He's not always like that. There are days when he's still good to me." I took her hand, feeling it tremble. Mom, those good days don't make up for the days he hits you. You can't keep living like this. She looked down, her voice barely a whisper like the wind. I know, but I'm scared, David. If I leave, I'll lose everything, this house, the memories, and maybe even him. I know you don't understand, but I've spent my whole life with him. I wanted to scream to tell her that my father didn't deserve her love, but I held back. Yelling at her now would only make her retreat further. Instead, I said, Mom, I'm not asking you to leave right now, but I want you to be safe. I've hired someone to follow Dad. If he's doing something wrong, we'll have evidence to take him to court. My mother's eyes widened. Court? David, I'm not sure I want that. It would make everything so messy. I know, I said, softening my voice. But you deserve to live without fear. Let me help you, okay? She was silent for a moment, then nodded, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. I knew convincing her to walk away from my father wouldn't be easy, but I had to start somewhere. Over the next few days, I stayed in Chicago, sleeping on the sofa in the living room. My father was often out, especially in the evenings, which made me suspect he was with Jessica. Every time my mother mentioned him, I could see both sadness and hope in her, as if she were still waiting for a better version of him. I couldn't stand the thought that she still loved the man who had hurt her, but I knew I couldn't force her to change overnight. I checked in with Carl every day. He reported that my father was frequently meeting Jessica at a downtown hotel, and he had managed to take a few photos of them together. He's not very careful, Carl said over the phone. But I'll need more time to find evidence of the abuse. Are you sure your mom will cooperate if it comes to court? I sighed. My mom, she's not ready yet, but I'll convince her. To ensure my mother's safety, I contacted a security company Carl recommended. I hired a professional bodyguard named Mike, a tall, quiet man who seemed trustworthy. I explained the situation, and Mike agreed to keep an eye on my mother from a distance, ensuring her safety when my father was home. If he lays a hand on her, I'll step in, Mike said, his voice firm as steel. I felt a slight sense of relief, but the worry in my heart lingered. I also looked into organizations in Chicago that support victims of domestic violence. I called the National Domestic Violence Hotline, asking for advice on how to help my mother regain her confidence. The woman on the line suggested encouraging her to attend counseling or a support group. People like your mother often need time, she said. Be patient, but don't let her feel alone. I started spending more time with my mother, not just to protect her, but to make her feel loved. One afternoon, I took her for a walk around the neighborhood where the maple trees were turning a vibrant red. We stopped at a small cafe she used to take me to when I was a kid. I remember this place, I said, pointing to the corner where I used to eat ice cream in the summer. You always picked chocolate, even though I insisted vanilla was better. My mother laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd seen since arriving in Chicago. You always argued about ice cream, David, but you always let me win. Because I love you, I said, holding her hand. And I won't let anyone hurt you anymore. She looked at me, her eyes welling up. You're the best thing in my life, David, but I'm scared. Scared that I'm not strong enough to change. I'll help you, I said. I promise. But this journey was far from easy. One evening, as I was checking emails from Carl, my father came home early. I heard the front door slam, followed by his voice booming from the living room. Margaret, what did you do to the kitchen this time? Can't you do anything right? I jumped up, my heart pounding. My mother was in the kitchen, and I saw her shrink back as my father stormed in. James, I was just cooking, she said, her voice small, almost apologetic. I stepped into the kitchen, positioning myself between her and my father. Dad, stop it, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You don't need to yell at her like that. He looked at me, his eyes as cold and sharp as they were years ago. David, this is my house. I'll say whatever I want. Did you come here to start trouble? I clenched my fists, feeling the terrified 10-year-old boy creeping back, trembling before him. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I'm here for Mom. If you touch her again, I won't let it slide." My father smirked, but I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. "You're threatening me? You're just a kid who knows how to code." He turned and stomped upstairs, and I heard the bedroom door slam shut. My mother grabbed my hand, her voice shaking. "David, don't do that. I don't want you and your father fighting." "Mom, I can't let him keep doing this," I said. "You have to let me protect you." She didn't respond, just lowered her head, and I knew she was still wrestling with herself. A few days later, Carl called, his voice tinged with excitement. "I've got something you'll want to see," he said. "Meet me at the usual cafe now." I arrived at the cafe, and Carl slid a stack of photos across the table. The pictures showed my father and Jessica in a car at a hotel and included text messages Carl had obtained from a source at my father's company. "He's not just cheating," Carl said. "He's also been siphoning money from your family's joint account to buy her gifts, jewelry, handbags. If you want to sue, this is solid evidence." I looked at the photos, a mix of anger and relief washing over me. "What about the abuse against my mom?" I asked. Carl shook his head. "Nothing concrete yet. I'd need your mom to testify, or at least a video or audio recording. But with what we have now, you could start with a case for misappropriation of joint assets." I nodded, but I knew deep down that suing over money wasn't enough. I wanted my father to pay for what he'd done to my mother. Not just this time, but for all the years she lived in fear. I began planning to get my mother out of the house. I found a small apartment in Chicago near the home of an old friend of hers, Ellen, who used to be her colleague at the elementary school. Ellen agreed to let my mother stay with her temporarily if she decided to leave. "Margaret is a strong woman," Ellen said when I called, "but she needs someone to remind her of that." I also contacted a therapist who specialized in helping domestic violence survivors. I arranged a counseling session for my mother, though she was hesitant. "I don't want to tell my story to a stranger," she said when I brought it up. "Just try it once, Mom," I said. "If you don't like it, you can stop. But I want you to know you're not alone." She nodded, but I saw the fear in her eyes. I knew that taking even a small step away from my father would be the hardest thing for her. After a week in Chicago, I returned to Seattle, carrying my mother's promise that she would think about leaving my father. "I need time, David," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. I wanted to believe her. But I knew my father, James Carson, was not someone who easily relinquished control. All I could do was hope that Carl and Mike would do their jobs well and that my mother would find the strength to face the truth. Seattle was as rainy as ever, but this time I no longer saw the rain as something to escape. The days in Chicago had changed me. I had done everything I could to protect my mother, hiring Carl the investigator, Mike the bodyguard, contacting organizations that support domestic violence victims, and arranging a small apartment near Ellen's house for my mother to move to when she was ready. But she was still in that house, with my father, with the memories and love she couldn't let go of. Every time I thought about it, it felt like a stone was pressing down on my chest. I went back to my daily routine, but my mind was consumed with thoughts of my mother. Every day I checked for updates from Carl, who was still tailing my father, and his secretary, Jessica. But what I wanted most was evidence of my father's abuse. Carl said that was the hardest part. "Your mom needs to testify, or I need to catch him in the act. But it's best if she speaks up," he said. I knew convincing my mother would be the biggest challenge. She still loved my father, or at least a version of him I had never seen. Every time I called, I tried to draw out her strength, but she always deflected. "I'm fine, David," she said, though her voice trembled. "Don't worry about me." Then one evening, as I sat in my apartment watching the rain fall outside the window, my phone buzzed. It was Mike, the bodyguard. His voice was urgent, unlike his usual calm demeanor. "David, I just restrained James. He attacked your mom in the kitchen. I've called the police. You should come to Chicago now." My heart stopped. "How's my mom? Is she okay?" "She's fine, just a few bruises. I stepped in time. The camera you asked me to install caught everything. You need to come talk to her. She's shaken up, but she needs you." Okay, I'll catch the earliest flight. What about my dad? Where is he? I asked, my voice laced with worry. Mike said my father had left the house after he intervened. My father had tried to attack Mike but wasn't able to overpower him. After the call, I booked a flight immediately, the latest one to Chicago that night. While packing, I called Carl. Mike said he has the incident on camera. Do you need anything else? Carl responded, his voice tinged with excitement. I've got enough, David. Besides Mike's video, I have photos and messages between your dad and Jessica, receipts from the joint account, and a statement from one of his colleagues saying he bragged about controlling your mom. If your mom agrees to testify, he won't get away. I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and relief. My father had gone too far, and this time he would pay. But I knew the biggest challenge was still my mother. She needed the courage to face my father, the court, and herself. The plane landed in Chicago at midnight. I took a taxi straight to my mother's house, my heart pounding. When I knocked, Ellen, my mother's old friend, opened the door. David, she said, her voice full of concern, Margaret's in the living room. She needs you. My mother was sitting on the sofa, clutching a thin blanket, her face pale. A fresh bruise on her cheek made me want to scream. I knelt down and took her hands. Mom, I'm here now. Are you okay? She nodded, but her eyes were brimming with tears. I'm sorry, David. I thought he'd stop, but he never stops. I hugged her, feeling her body tremble. Mom, it's not your fault, but we have to end this. I have enough evidence to take Dad to court. If you agree to testify, he'll pay for what he's done. She shook her head, her voice choked. I'm scared, David. If I testify, everyone will know. I don't want the whole world to know about our family. I held her hands tightly, looking into her eyes. You have to be strong, Mom. I'm here and I won't let you face this alone. Ellen, standing in the corner of the room, spoke up. Margaret, David's right. He's done everything to protect you. Now you need to stand up for yourself. My mother was silent for a moment, then nodded, still trembling. Okay, David, I'll try. For you. I hugged her tighter, feeling as though we had just broken through an invisible wall. But I knew the battle ahead would be tough, not just with my father, but with the scars in my mother's heart. The next day, I met Rachel, the lawyer Ethan had recommended, at her office in downtown Chicago. Rachel was a woman in her 30s, her hair tied up neatly, her voice sharp yet warm. She reviewed the evidence, the video from Mike's camera, the photos and messages from Carl, the receipts from the joint account, and the colleague's statement. This is a strong case, she said. The video clearly shows abusive behavior, and the financial evidence supports the charge of misappropriation of assets. If Margaret testifies, we can ensure James is convicted. I nodded, but I was worried about my mother. My mom. She's still scared. She still loves him, or at least the memory of him. How can she get through this? Rachel leaned toward me. David, I've worked with many abuse victims. The most important thing is that Margaret feels supported. I'll meet with her and help her prepare mentally. But you need to be there for her, not just in court, but afterward as well. A few days later, I brought my mother to meet Rachel. My mother sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly, but Rachel knew how to make her feel at ease. Margaret, she said, you don't have to tell the whole story. Just tell the truth about what happened. The court will see you as a strong woman, not a weak one. My mother nodded, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. I knew she was thinking about my father, the days he was kind to her, the promises he never kept. But I also saw a glimmer of hope, small but growing. 3 months later, the trial officially began. I sat beside my mother, her hands ice cold in mine. My father sat on the other side, dressed in a gray suit, his hair still slicked back. But his usual confident demeanor was gone. He had a lawyer, an older man with a smooth voice, who tried to portray him as a husband misunderstood due to work stress. Rachel presented the case with remarkable precision. She played the video from Mike's camera, the moment my father grabbed my mother, pushed her against the wall, and shouted insults. The sound of my mother's scream in the video made me want to cry, but I squeezed her hand, trying to stay strong. Rachel went on to present Carl's photos, my father and Jessica at the hotel, the receipts showing his misuse of joint funds. She called Mike as a witness who recounted the incident with unshakable calm. My father's lawyer tried to counter, claiming my mother had provoked him by snooping through his phone. He even tried to blame me, saying I had incited my mother against my father. But Rachel didn't let him get away with it. She called the doctor who had examined my mother, who confirmed the bruises, and a bank employee who testified about the unauthorized transfers. When it was my mother's turn to testify, I saw her tremble as she took the stand. Rachel asked her about the years living with my father, the times he hit her, the fear she had kept hidden. My mother spoke, her voice breaking. I tried to love James even though he hurt me. I thought he would change, but this time I can't keep living in fear. My father looked at her, and I saw a fleeting moment of remorse in his eyes, but it quickly vanished. When it was his turn to testify, he pleaded for forgiveness. I was wrong, Your Honor, he said, his voice trembling. I lost control because of stress. I don't want to lose my family. I couldn't take it anymore. I asked to speak, and Rachel agreed. I stood before the court looking straight at my father. You don't love Mom, I said, my voice shaking but resolute. You love controlling her. When I was 10, I saw you hit her and I couldn't do anything, but now I won't let you keep hurting her. The courtroom fell silent, broken only by my mother's soft sobs. I sat down, feeling as though I had shed a heavy burden, but also pained by confronting my father, the man who was once my entire world. The judge, a man with a stern face, delivered the verdict after 2 days of deliberation. My father was convicted of domestic violence and misappropriation of assets. He was sentenced to 8 months in prison, along with a 5-year restraining order preventing him from contacting my mother. The joint assets were redistributed, ensuring my mother had enough to start a new life. Rachel said my father could appeal, but with the clear evidence, his chances of winning were slim. As my father was led away, he looked at my mother, his eyes a mix of anger and desperation. Margaret, you'll regret this, he said, but my mother didn't look back. She held my hand, and for the first time I saw her stand tall, as if a part of her burden had been lifted. Outside the courtroom, I saw Jessica standing in a corner of the hallway wearing a red coat, watching my father being led away. She said nothing, just turned and disappeared. Later, I heard she had left Chicago, abandoning my father once his reputation and wealth crumbled. I wasn't surprised. After the trial, I stayed in Chicago for a few more days to help my mother move to the apartment near Ellen's house. The apartment was small but bright, with a window overlooking a park. My mother started arranging her potted plants, and I saw her smile, though it was a small one. I'll be okay, David, she said as I prepared to return to Seattle. Thank you. I hugged her, feeling as though I had rediscovered a part of her I thought was lost. You don't need to thank me, I said. I just want you to be happy. And that's the story I want to tell you about the journey my mother and I took together to reach a brighter future. I only hope that every woman in this world can live in a happy, fulfilling marriage. And if they find themselves in pain, I hope they can find the strength to stand up and reclaim justice for themselves.